My name is Esther Mintz, and today is February 6, 2018. I'm interviewing Sandy Schwartz at the Max M. Fisher Federation Building in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. This interview is being recorded as part of the Women in Leadership Oral History Project. The Women's Philanthropy Department of the Jewish Federation has had several names throughout its history, including Women's Division and Women's Campaign and Education Department. For the purposes of this interview, we will refer to it by its current name, Women's Philanthropy. Do you give permission to the Leonard N. Simons Jewish Community Archives to publish, duplicate, or otherwise use this recording for educational purposes and for use as deemed appropriate by the archives?
I do.
Oh, great.
Now,
Sandy,
we're married.
Let's start at the very beginning. When and where were you born?
I was born in December 1943 in Norfolk, Virginia.
Oh, great. And did you stay there, remain there? Is
I
that where you
grew up in Norfolk, and I still have family who live there. I'm still extremely connected to my roots. I maintain a group of girlfriends, 11 of us, who went to nursery school together.
Fabulous.
So yes, I'm still very, very much.
Well, how fortunate that you'll have those people in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, was philanthropy important to your family while you were growing up?
I was not aware of philanthropy per se. My parents both worked, but before my mother went to work, she was very involved in things like the Denver Home for Asthmatic Children and Hadassah. Neither of my parents were involved in Federation, although I know they were donors. And my family in Norfolk continues to be donors. My father was very busy supporting many people in his family and really didn't have a lot of time for what you would call philanthropy. He was mostly involved and attached to his synagogue. And
do you have siblings?
I do.
Uh-huh. And what brought you to Detroit?
I met my husband, Alan. He was in school in Boston, and I was there working, and mutual friends introduced us.
Oh, nice.
We still speak to them and consider them best friends, even still, and we will be married 50 years in June. And I came to Detroit as a bride. Did not know one soul, and I had my experiences as a new bride and in a new city.
Okay. What were your impressions of the Detroit Jewish community? Here you come, not knowing anybody, whatever. What were your impressions of the Jewish community?
In all honesty, I had a lot of trouble when I moved here. As I used to say to Alan, it isn't that people don't like me. They don't know me. I found the community to be very closed. I would go places where there would be a group of women, and they wouldn't include me because I think they just didn't know what to say to somebody that they didn't have that Mumford background with, or the elementary school.
Growing up back.
Exactly, and I think that was fostered a lot by the fact that most of the young people had gone to school in the Michigan area and had never had to really step out on their own and make their own friendships, so they had no concept of what someone who was trying to do that was feeling.
In finding your way, what were you active in any organizations beside Federation?
Yes, I didn't come to Federation immediately when I started to get involved in community. My first exposure to Federation was I would hear stories about the solicitation process. And, you know, I waited for someone to ask me for a gift. But the saddest part of all is that no one asked, because no one knew I was here.
Oh, wow.
And I had a sense of loss, really. I felt really not part of the community. But aside from that, I began to realize, because I didn't have a group of girlfriends here and any kind of support system, I first turned to my synagogue, Shaarey Zedek, and got involved with sisterhood and went from there.
Great. Where was Shaarey Zedek located?
It had already moved
Just
to Southfield.
Uh-huh.
It was.
And what role did you do in the sisterhood?
I like to think of myself as a very good foot soldier. I did whatever was asked, and along the way I moved up to this job and that job and some leadership opportunities, and chairing the major fundraiser for a couple years. Then I was asked to be president.
Wow.
So
Did you accept?
I did. I did.
Nice. And when and how did you first become involved with Federation and Women's Philanthropy?
It was around the time that I was becoming more and more involved at Shaarey Zedek that for whatever reason, I got invited to participate in the leadership training program. And I was very honored. And it was probably my best and first introduction. However, I think by that time I was being solicited, and one of the things I remember, and I don't even know whether it came before or after I did the leadership training, is I contributed $100 to Federation, and there was an event for women who donated $100 for the first time. And I recall it being a wonderful stretch for me, and I was so excited and thrilled, and it was acknowledged. And it just stands in my mind as my first philanthropy, if you will.
Who were your mentors in women's philosophy? Philanthropy.
Marlene Borman was president when I first joined the board. And some of the presidents that came after her, like Diane Klein, Linda Klein, were women I looked up to. There were others as well.
What was your level of involvement at the beginning?
I would volunteer to be on a committee, and little by little, I would be. I think I was a good volunteer.
Good. Did you make friends in the meanwhile?
And in the meantime, it was a wonderful source of friendship. If I had not liked what I was doing and didn't feel a passion for it, I wouldn't have continued. But the friendship was just a wonderful byproduct of the.
What were some of the activities?
Well, I just want to say that when I went through the leadership training, having grown up in a small Jewish community that did have resources and was a committed, tight community, I was overwhelmed and amazed by how much Detroit had to offer. It was unbelievable. And so I became a convert, if you will. I just was in awe of what we did. And what was the next question?
What did your family think of your involvement?
I don't think they realized, even to this day, the extent of how much volunteering and philanthropy plays into my everyday life. But they were very proud of me.
Oh, good. It makes you feel better, too. And more
Yes,
comfortable
yes.
doing it.
And I have been recognized and had many honors that they have shared with me. And
That's wonderful.
yeah.
What positions did you hold in women's philanthropy?
Well,
and when?
what you asked me is what I did when I first got involved. I just served on committees and little by little would move up.
Did you become a campaign chair?
I was never a campaign chair. I worked on campaign, I chaired some of campaign's committees, but I became president of Women's Philanthropy kind of through the back door.
What year was that?
It was 2004. And that occurred because the campaign chair, or the associate campaign chair, for personal reasons, decided not to go on to be the campaign chair, but they had already selected another campaign, the associate, and they just felt at the parties that be, felt at the time that they would want her to stay where she was and just fill the slot of president. So I like to say I was a very reluctant leader. All of my volunteer endeavors, my involvement, my commitment, enthusiasm didn't come as a moving up a ladder, so to speak. I didn't have any aspirations, nor do I now, to be a leader. I love being a foot soldier. So it was challenging to assume.
Sure, very.
Yeah, so that's how I got,
Particularly when
like when you do a
get
job,
inspired
it's
to
the
be.
Peter principle. You do a job well, you get moved to the next one, and before you know it, that's what
What were
happens.
some of your duties as president?
I think my feeling is that I was a steward of a wonderful organization that had a strong history, and my biggest duty was to preserve our group, keep it viable, build on the strengths that we had, and through little steps, carry it on to pass on to the next group of leaders. However,
Did you have some challenges?
one
Something stand out in your mind?
my philosophy, I think, which really stems from my background in growing up in a small town, et cetera, and moving here as an outsider, what had a lot to do with outreach. So when I was president, we had like 14 or more different education programs going. It's something that we don't do now, but I saw this as a way to reach out to people in the community who may not have been involved in Federation, and to involve them in committees, and it was a lot of phone calling and hand holding and whatever. I did have, in thinking about my presidency, some challenges with where women's philanthropy fit into the big picture. And If you want me to go into more detail, I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
For example,
Because those would be some of your challenges and maybe your proudest accomplishments.
I had a very nice relationship with Federation, but what I didn't realize is that there was the Jewish Federation and there was Women's Philanthropy on the other side, and there was not that much interaction. So, on the campaign side, not coming to the presidency through campaign and not having experienced the players, so to speak, there was not a lot of my involvement.
Interplay.
And one of our committees was a lunch and learn where we had rabbis and speakers come in to do Torah portion discussions, and it went very well, and we had a really committed committee who hoped we would study for a year and then conclude our studies with a woman's trip to Israel. It was going to be a personal journey, a passport to Israel. So each of these women and others would be able to see what they had learned, which, was announced and told to the leaders of Federation a year before, when we started it. And that was that. And then as the year progressed and we started to talk about our plans for the trip, it didn't come at the right time for Federation. They were interested not in an educational trip, they were interested in a campaign trip, and that's what they focused on. So it caused a lot of challenge for me and a lot of disappointment for me as well as for the committee.
I can imagine, when you have these high hopes. What is your
And I think it was just really a lack of communication. If they had said to me, they being the Federation leaders, we could have talked and worked through some of this. But, it pointed out to me after the fact that there was a over here and then an over there. And had I been a little more astute or a little more sophisticated, I might have picked up on it sooner than I did.
I see. What was your proudest accomplishment?
I'm not great at even recognizing accomplishments. I sort of lead by getting into something. But I will say that the involvement of hundreds of people
that's quite an accomplishment.
throughout the community and the outreach, not just with campaign, although we did bring in new donors, and there really, for sure, during my presidency, there was the campaign had its primacy, and there was no question, but that's what we were about. But I just kind of approached it a little bit differently because that had been my experience. And, certainly I turned out to be a good philanthropist, starting with little committees and, small gifts.
Right.
So I felt that there had been a certain culture within women's philanthropy, a certain elite feeling, which, I was okay with, but, I didn't feel necessarily that I should feel elite, and I wanted to be able to share the good parts and the wonderful opportunities I had with as many people as I could.
I think that's a great direction. And which staff members did you work with, and what was your relationship with them?
Well, when I was just working on committees or involved at the committee level. I knew the staff people, but I wasn't on a day-to-day involvement with any of them. When I was going into my presidency, and Susie Pappas was the campaign chair, we started to work with Marion Friedman, who was just coming in as the director of Women's Philanthropy. And so we were all three in new positions, and we worked really as a trio. We worked together very, very well. And some of the other past chairs, like Sally Krugel, I'm still good friends with to this day. And in addition to Sally, there was Michelle Passon, who I worked with for a number of years in a program called Cancer Thrivers Network for Jewish Women. And we co-founded this group with Patty Niemer, who has since passed away from breast cancer. So, you know, I kind of knew the players, but didn't have close friendships with them unless it was through whatever I was doing at the time, and then went on to make friends with these people on a closer level later.
And do you feel women solicit differently than men?
Listen or?
Solicit.
Oh, solicit. I do. I think that we approach donors with a softer side. We approach donors with a passion, not for raising the money, but for what the money does. Early in my experiences with Federation, I saw a video. It was about, does your pocketbook reflect your values? And it spoke to me. And I, from that point, always tried to make my checkbook reflect what it was that was meaningful to me. And you know, we all look back at the end of the year at where we have put our philanthropic dollars. And you know, I do try and be mindful that it will reflect who I am, what my values are, and where I want the money to go.
Yes. Do you feel Federation has valued women's philanthropy?
I think that it has valued women's philanthropy, and I think it does more and more as time passes. You know, there was a time when in all organizations that included men and women, that the women were the entry point. That's no longer the case in any of these organizations. So women can start within the Federation family and bypass the women's philanthropy department altogether. But I think that there is now an appreciation not just of the little few dollars that were extra dollars coming to the campaign, but you know, as value women as real players.
Okay, so you think that women, it's important for women to have their own
I think as many opportunities as we can find to bring new people into the fold and have them learn what our community does is a wonderful thing. And what I see now is that there aren't as many opportunities. So women who do leadership training now come out, and there are no places to put all these women in terms of leadership roles. So anything that we can create or have that expands on involving more people, I think is good.
Oh, that's great, because you've educated them and trained them, and they need someplace. What are your hopes for women's philanthropy in the future?
Well, I do hope that we can continue to involve new people in leadership, that we are not seen as elitist, and that we outreach as much as we can and involve as many people as we can. I think that it's, to me, very reassuring when I go to a board meeting and don't know half the people there. There, is constantly a turnover, and it's one of the few groups where they don't rely on past leadership necessarily to keep the group going. And I think we should continue along those lines and understand that we are now working with the Federation leadership as an equal partner.
I'm going to change a little bit, and let's talk about Jewish Women's Foundation.
Okay.
It is a separate department from Women's Philanthropy, as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
What is Jewish Women's Foundation, and how is it different from Women's Philanthropy?
When Jewish Women's Philanthropy was being created, there were 3 women who, or 4, put it together. And
Who are the 3?
there was Beverly Liss, I think Penny Blumenstein, and
It'll come to you.
yeah, it'll come to me. Someone who was really less involved, I think, in Federation Women's Department or philanthropy structure, but certainly involved in Federation. And I'm having a senior moment.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was one of maybe 7 or 8 or 9 women who joined right away, because having been a volunteer for as many years as I had and being interested in all of these women's issues, I knew it was all about the money, and that getting money to these groups did a whole lot better than just volunteering your time. So this was, for me, a natural. And so I became involved from the inception of the group.
And how did you first learn about it?
Well, I was sort of on the scene, and it was a group of women, most of whom were involved in Federation already, and as was I. And so I just knew about it. And it was not any kind of an outreach, if you will.
When did you become a trustee?
Right from the inception of the group.
Okay.
I'm one of those founding trustees.
Oh, great. And what year was that?
I can't remember, yeah.
Was it quite a bit after your presidency, or just sort of?
It was after my presidency, but not that long after.
Tell me, describe how the grant-making process works.
Well, one of the big differences between women's philanthropy and Jewish Women's Foundation is that the women's philanthropy raises the money, and the women's philanthropy gives it away. They exist to make grants to causes that support women and girls.
I see.
And so it's very targeted, very selective. And
You think it's very important to have it specifically targeted to women?
yes, because in the world that I grew up in, we often were on a back burner because we didn't have those opportunities to speak up and to speak out. And this also, in my mind, gave women who were not really involved in women's philanthropy an access to what Jewish Federation is all about. It brought them in the door, and they got to learn about all the things that their campaign dollars were supporting. And these are just excess funds that go specifically to women's needs.
How many grants are given?
Oh, there can be as many, I would say, as 12, maybe 15. It depends from year to year.
Is it once a year?
Once a year.
I see. Is there a limited amount of money given?
Yes. The foundation raises money by, to join the foundation, you have to donate a certain amount, and then you have to donate a certain amount for a period of years. And they build on that little pot of money and invest it. And they take a percentage, like all foundations do, that they use for grants. It varies from year to year depending upon the market. Today would not be a good day.
Yeah. Tell me, who makes the decision who gets the grants?
There is one trustee, one vote. Every trustee has
How many
equal.
trustees are there?
I think that there are, 60, 80. I no longer, while I was involved in the beginning on a leadership involvement, because of other activities and other interests and, personalities and politics, etc. I'm not as involved day to day in how the Jewish Women's Foundation governs itself. I think it's had its challenges and it's dealing with them.
Mm-hmm. What's your message to young women about why they should participate in programs like Women's Philanthropy and the Jewish Foundation, Women's Foundation?
For me, people who go to these programs have an opportunity to hear things that are outside of their little worlds, and they can learn so much from what they're exposed to. And the more things that they participate in and the more involved they are, I think the more they feel that they are part of a community larger than themselves. And I'm sold. It was a wonderful career path for me, actually. I was blessed that I personally didn't have to work every day, and I had hours that I was able to give. And for those women who can't do that, they're doing other things. But for women who do have the leisure time, so to speak, and
the desire.
Well, I have come to realize not everybody is cut out to be a volunteer. I see some people who try really hard. It doesn't come naturally. But if you can make it work for you, you will get more out of it than anything you give.
That sounds so wonderful. Thank you, Sandy, so much for sharing your time and thoughts with me.
And I would just conclude by saying, in terms of young people today, that my participation in women's philanthropy has just been a gift I gave myself. It was the gift of friendship, the gift of working to make our community a better place, and also to have the opportunity to work with women who are passionate and committed, and it has really been a labor of love for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Your talents really show, and I thank you again.
You're welcome.